CBP's current fiscal posture. Also, while I know you are still limited in what you can say about the budget request for the coming year, we will want to have a good discussion about what it will take to address all of these challenges, both now and in fiscal year 2022. In conclusion, on behalf of the subcommittee, I convey our heartfelt condolences to the families and colleagues of those who have lost their lives in the line of duty. Tragically, since January 2020, CBP has seen 32 line of duty deaths, 30 of which were directly tied to COVID-19. I reaffirm our continued support for the health and well-being of your workforce and our appreciation for their service. I now turn to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, Ranking Member Fleischman, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Miller, I too want to welcome you to the subcommittee, sir. Thank you for being with us today as we discuss the operations of Customs and Border Protection. Your decades of service to protecting this country and your commitment and leadership with Customs and CBP are greatly appreciated. I would especially like to thank you for stepping into this role of acting commissioner during this transition. I know this position has taken you away from your home and family, but we all appreciate the stable and steady leadership you provide to the mission and the men and women at CBP, especially during this challenging year. I pass along my sincere and heartfelt condolences, as did our chair, to the families, friends, and colleagues of the 34 CBP employees who lost their lives to COVID. The issues we are seeing at all of our borders and ports of entry are complex and make all the more challenging due to the pandemic and world's unsettled economies. We are seeing record numbers of migrants presented at our southern border, numbers we would not have imagined even in the busiest month of 2019, that threaten the safety of our nation. We have heard about CBP identifying serious known criminals and even individuals matching to the terrorist watch list within the many large groups apprehended at the border. Let me be clear. I am not saying that every migrant apprehended is a hardened criminal. I know that is not the case. However, the sheer volume of people makes it harder for CBP officers and agents to properly identify and screen everyone for threats and that pose threats to our communities. Further, the seizure of drugs, weapons, and counterfeit goods have not slowed during the pandemic, indicating that the cartels and transnational criminal organizations are still targeting our borders and our communities to fuel their profits. I was really hoping we would have the fiscal 2022 budget at the time of this hearing, but it appears, Mr. Miller, timing is on your side and you will have avoided any questions about the upcoming budget year. But I will tell you, and you know, that the investments we make with CBP are so important to the mission. The funds we provide for people, training, technology, operations, and yes, even the wall have shown to play a significant role in protecting our country. I have concerns that what I do know about the CBP budget, I don't like. I'm concerned that the fiscal 2022 budget does not contain any new funds for the border wall construction, even though work still exists. And when you consider the work left unfinished by the removal of DoD funds, DHS might need even more investment to complete those miles. Even more disturbing is the proposal to rescind funds at the end of the year. I don't know how the administration can make that math add up when decisions on how to resume border wall construction or the cost to cancel contracts have not yet been made. I think it's foolish to back into a number when we haven't even reviewed the contracts and current needs. Further, I fear that without adequate investment and without a strong message that we are actively enforcing all of our nation's immigration laws, the numbers at the border will only grow, and consequently, will strain the resources across CBP's mission. I hope the parts of the budget I have not seen yet will shed some light on how we're going to resolve these challenges. Thank you again, Mr. Miller, for being with us this morning. I very much look forward to your testimony, sir. And Madam Chairwoman, I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Miller, we will submit the full text of your official statement for the hearing record. But I do want to note that we did not receive your testimony until late yesterday, even though it was due to the committee 48 hours prior to the start of this hearing. This type of delay is unacceptable and hinders Congress's ability to conduct its oversight. And I certainly hope that this is not going to be a pattern as we continue to request important information for the subcommittee. Please begin your oral summary, which I ask that you keep to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Chairwoman Royable Allard, Ranking Member Fleischman, and members of the subcommittee, I am honored to testify before you today on behalf of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. CBP proudly serves the American people, and we take very seriously our responsibility to protect the United States from terrorism and criminal activity while enabling lawful travel and trade. These responsibilities have been challenged by COVID-19. The pandemic has forced all of us to do things differently, and CBP is no exception. We have changed how we process, care for, and monitor those in our custody. CBP, along with our federal, state, local, and non-governmental partners, have implemented a robust, multi-layered approach to ensure migrants are tested before continuing their immigration journey into the United States. Suspected COVID-19 cases are referred to local health systems for appropriate testing, diagnosis, and treatment. DHS is working to expand non-congregate sheltering for migrants who test positive or have potentially been exposed. Tragically, COVID-19 has claimed the lives of 34 CBP employees and 30 in the line of duty. 34 lives among the more than 586,000 American lives the virus has claimed to date in this country. Services will be held today for an employee who lost his life in the line of duty. Since the pandemic started, over 8,700 CBP employees have tested positive. Even under the cloud of COVID-19, we are better prepared today to meet the demand placed on us during large-scale migrant surges such as we are currently experiencing on the southwest border. In March, CBP encountered 172,000 migrants attempting to cross the southwest land border. That number increased 3% in April to 178,000, with over 62% immediately expelled pursuant to Title 42. Although fewer than 11% of encounters in March were unaccompanied children, or UCs, by the end of March, that population accounted for almost half of all the people in our custody. In response, we mobilized 4 soft-sided facilities in Arizona and Texas with a combined capacity of 2,500 to expedite UC transfers from CBP custody to Department of Health and Human Services custody. DHS stood up the Movement Coordination Cell with representatives from CBP, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, HHS Office of Refugee Resettlement, and U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. This interagency approach has been remarkably successful in decreasing the average number of children in CBP custody. On May 11th, there were just 455 children in our custody. The average time in custody has also dropped from 115 hours in March to just 28 hours in May. CBP faces other challenges at our nation's ports of entry as well. In coordination with the governments of Mexico and Canada, only essential trade and travel is allowed across our borders. These restrictions are reviewed monthly to protect public health without unnecessary prolonging the restrictions. International air travel into the United States decreased by 95% in March 2020 and currently stands 70% below pre-pandemic levels. Presidential proclamations remain in place, limiting entry from China, Iran, the Schengen area, the United Kingdom, the Republic of Ireland, Brazil, South Africa, and India. International travel to Mexico and the Caribbean have shown signs of rebounding, and CBP stands ready to secure and facilitate air travel as it returns to pre-pandemic levels. This sharp decline in volume directly impacts CBP's budget. International air passengers pay about 94% of CBP user fees, which in turn fund about 40% of CBP's Office of Field Operations salaries. Day after day, the men and women of CBP persistently safeguard America's economic and public health, ensuring travelers and goods move safely and efficiently across U.S. borders, that migrants and visitors are properly documented, and that trade laws, regulations, and related international agreements are enforced. We are absolutely committed to balancing border security, national security, properly caring for those in our custody, and keeping the American people and our workforce safe. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Miller, it's my understanding that CBP has recently implemented a form of prosecutorial discretion to include the issuance of notices to report to ICE, also known as RTI or an I-385, to certain migrant families in the RGV sector of Texas due to severe overcrowding in CBP facilities. This began at a time when CBP had thousands of unaccompanied children in its custody and was also having to manage the impact of COVID-19. As CBP has worked with HHS to reduce the number of children in CBP custody, the number of such notices issued has gone down significantly. Notice to report to ICE have unfortunately been referred to as catch and release, which I have always found to be extremely disrespectful to migrants, most of whom are fleeing desperate conditions. I believe that no one should be using a fishing term to refer to human beings. Mr. Miller, can you elaborate on the rationale for issuing such notices, including the impact of changes in ICE operations, and describe how you have worked to introduce more efficiency and accountability into the process?
Chairwoman, thank you for the question. As you indicate, notice to report was initiated in the Rio Grande Valley and only in the Rio Grande Valley on March 19th, 2021. Let me be clear, this is not a decision we made lightly, but it was necessary, as you pointed out, given the capacity in our facilities and the need to decompress our facilities to keep not only the folks in our custody safe, but to keep our agents and officers safe. The surge of family units began in RGV on January 23rd when Tamaulipas stopped taking back Northern Triangle families with tender age children under the age of 7. The situation on the ground on March 19th, we had encountered 2,439 migrants in between the ports of entry in RGV alone. We had over 2,600 unaccompanied children, of which 1,943 unaccompanied children were held over 72 hours in our soft-sided facility. Pre-COVID, the capacity of our soft-sided facility was 1,000. What we did before initiating our notice to report is we moved 470 agents to the southwest border. We set up virtual processing. We increased overtime for our Border Patrol agents. We moved some of the migrants for processing laterally from RGV to other sectors. The DHS volunteer force was activated. HHS and ICE personnel were deployed to our facility in Donna. The notice to report process cuts the paperwork in half, but let me clear up some misconceptions about the notice to report. Agents perform the same national security and border security checks they do as they would with notice to appear. They will collect biometrics and facial recognition or facial for the I-385, and they complete the I-213. The migrants are also given a G56, which tells them that they must report to an ICE location within 60 days. This is essentially the same process that we performed during the NTA, same checks, collecting the same biographic and biometric information. Let me correct a common misrepresentation. Currently, DOJ time and date to determine in the NTA, the time and date is marked as to to be determined. So we are not issuing a court date on an NTA today because of DOJ not having a non-detained docket. We are filling out 5 less forms, cutting the time in half. And the reason that this continues in RGV, as you mentioned, to a limited extent, is we continue to see about 1,700 migrants a day with a greater percentage of family units in RGV, 41% versus 25% nationally, and a greater number of UCs, unaccompanied children, 14% versus 8% nationally. What we are doing to fix this, we are working with the DHS CIO, Chief Information Officer, ICE, CIS, ELOIR to streamline and automate the A-file process. Thank you for your question. Chairwoman?
We can hear you, Madam Chair.
Yeah. So CBP does conduct a security assessment on individuals before they are considered for release with the notice to report to ICE?
They are.
They are. And what responsibilities does a recipient of a notice to report to ICE have, and what are the consequences for failing to appear or report?
Similar to the notice to appear, they are directed to report to an ICE office within 60 days. Within that 60 days, when they report to the ICE office, they will have to complete the NTA paperwork and obtain a court date.
Okay. And are there additional process forms that could address concerns such as ICE not being informed of when migrants with such notices are in certain locations?
So we are fixing those process notifications now through, thank you for your continued assistance for the Unified Immigration Portal. That system brings all the data together for CBP, ICE, HHS, and under the direction of the CIO from DHS, we continue to expand that program.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Miller. I would like to point out that the issuance of a notice to report to ICE is not a misuse of prosecutorial discretion, as some have mischaracterized it. It is a tool for managing the immigration adjudication process when overcrowding in CBP holding facilities has become a threat to health and safety, and ICE and HHS are unable to quickly assume custody of migrants. I now turn to our ranking member, Mr. Fleischman, for his questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Miller, we have been waiting for the administration to release the results of border wall construction contract review. I'm very concerned about reports that the administration is seeking to nullify the DHS appropriations that were the result of bipartisan, bicameral negotiations and rescind funds that were lawfully appropriated. Simply destroying the work that has already been done or that is under contract is foolish and contrary to what previous CBP commissioners have requested prior to the Trump administration. I have a few questions, sir. I'll start with 3 and then go from there. What is the status of the border wall contract review, and when do you anticipate that Congress will be briefed on those results? Can you tell us what criteria is being used to evaluate the existing contracts and pending work? And are frontline officers and agents being consulted, sir?
Sir, thank you for the question. As you know, we have signed the exemption for RGV, the safety and welfare exemption for RGV, as well as San Diego. For the erosion issue that we had out in San Diego. The border wall plan currently sits with DHS and the administration, and we await the decisions, and we'll implement once they're given to us.
Okay. A lot has changed over the past few years. Is there any effort underway to comprehensively evaluate the different layers of security, wall or barrier, technology, and law enforcement personnel that are needed to maintain operational security effectively and efficiently at the land borders?
Sir, yes, that is something that we're looking at very closely. As my predecessors used to call it, the three-legged stool: the infrastructure, the technology, the personnel. We need all three for border security. Certainly, the Border Patrol continues to look at their version of a workload staffing model, which we hope to roll out by the end of this year. We're looking at our technology needs and our infrastructure needs as well. So 100%, sir.
Thank you. Will this administration submit another border security improvement plan to the committee for review, sir?
I'll have to get back to you on that, sir.
Okay, we'd appreciate that. Mr. Miller, I asked these questions to your colleague, Mr. Johnson, last week, but I'd like to get your impression. The country is still operating under a Title 42 public health declaration because of the COVID pandemic. Under the Title 42 authority, ICE and CBP have been repatriating and removing migrants who have crossed the border illegally near immediately after their apprehension, thus keeping the numbers of migrants who are released into the U.S. after crossing illegally down. But we get the sense that there are talks of revoking the Title 42 declaration, which means the ability to swiftly repatriate and return migrants also goes away. For planning purposes, how many people are you estimating will flood the border and into CBP's stations for processing? And what plans does CBP have to meet the increased numbers? And can you meet these processing demands within your current budget?
Sir, thank you for the question. We continue, obviously, we're still under a global pandemic, and the CDC order will be lifted, when the health professionals decide that it needs to be. But as we look at the eventual, and we hope soon, lifting of Title 42, to be honest with you, for the sake of our economy and the world, we continue to assess our operations. Number one, the soft-sided facilities. We've stood up 4 soft-sided facilities. We're in the process of standing up a 5th soft-sided facility. We have moved additional resources downrange, Border Patrol agents. We've stood up what's called our movement coordination cell, which has helped us move out in coordination with HHS and ICE, which has helped us move children into the appropriate settings. We're also going to create a movement coordination cell for single adults and family units that'll be housed right here at the Ronald Reagan building. We continue to look at all of our processes and procedures to automate them, like the automated A-file, working with the DHS CIO. And we continue to look at our projections going forward. But right now, the majority of the encounters we see with migrants continue to be single adults, about 65%. And we believe we have the appropriate laws and policies in place to remove the single adults.
Mr. Miller, thank you for your responses, sir. Madam Chair, my time has expired and I will yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Miller, thank you for being here with you. And I appreciate all the good folks that work for you up and down the border, northern border, coastal, and every part of the U.S. I want to talk about non-essential travel. As you know, it's something I've been trying to do and try to open up since last year. Under the former Commissioner, Mark Morgan, we almost had something worked out where we could have a face-in depending on the health of the communities, and CBP and the local communities would decide how to open the borders in a safe way. We're in a much better situation than we were last year. As you know, vaccinations and cases in my hometown Laredo and in the Valley are extremely low and all that. My problem are contradictions that we have, and I'm not blaming you, but we let undocumented aliens into the U.S. and there's no health issue. We talk about bringing in legal Mexican visa holders that before the pandemic were spending over $19 billion for our restaurants, hotels, small businesses, not only the border, but I mean, it's California, Texas, Colorado, and all over that. But there's a health issue on that. They say it's a health issue, according to the secretary. When you let a rich Mexican fly in, they can fly in, and it's not a health issue. You let a poor Mexican that wants to come over and spend 15, 20 bucks or see a family member on the US side, it's a health issue. So there's a lot of contradictions. In my area along the border, there are some businesses that depend on 40, 50, maybe even % more on Mexican shoppers. When I talked to the secretary, he said it's a health issue, as I just mentioned, which I respectfully disagree with him the way he put it, especially on the contradictions I just mentioned to you. So I talked to CDC. CDC basically, well, the secretary said, talk to CDC, it's a health issue. I talked to CDC, they push it back to Homeland, and they said it's Homeland security issue. I've had very good talks with your health undersecretary, Gary, and he does a great job. And I'm just trying to figure out, when are we going to open this up? I mean, there's so many contradictions, and I got businesses that have closed down, not only because of the pandemic, but on top of that, you lose 40, 50, 60% of your business. What do we need to do to get this open in spite of all those contradictions I just laid out to you? And, my businesses are so frustrated. My communities are so frustrated. I mean, I assume we're going to open up one of these days, but I'm just trying to see if we can expedite this in a safe way. And I, want to follow up with you after this call, if you don't mind, after this hearing, should I say.
Congressman, thank you so much. And, first of all, thank you for recognizing the heroic work that the men and women of CBP continue to do under unprecedented times, under the most difficult situations. First and foremost, as you know, from the background of my career, I grew up in small communities on the northern border, and I understand the economic impact that this is having on the small communities and the communities on the southwest border. So really, I'm committed to working with you over the next 30 days or so to see what we can do in a more regional approach. And I look forward to working with you in the future. So we can do that as well. And we'll continue to consult with DHS, like you said, CWMD and CDC and CBP to ensure that we have a clear path forward. And I thank you for the question.
All right. And I'd like to follow up on that because I keep getting different signals on that. Just real quickly, I would ask you, because I'm going to ask for another line of questioning if we have time, but I would ask you to look at the technology and some of the requests for proposals that are set out to be 14 years of performance. And I'm a little worried about that. We can follow up. I know my time is up. I got about 20 seconds left, but I'm just concerned that if we go with some of the RFPs, we're going to see the same thing we saw with Boeing in 2008, and we're still in the same place with technology. So anyway, I'd like to follow up on that issue on some of the RFPs that you put out for towers and instruments and communications all on board. My time is up, but I'd like to follow up on that, Mr. Miller, and thank you for your time.
Mr. Pilar.
Follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Fleischman, Commissioner Miller. Thank you for being here today. Appreciate everything you're doing. As you mentioned, y'all are operating under some unprecedented times and hardships. Big thanks goes out to all the CBP agents and their families underneath you that show up every day with their number one goal of keeping Americans safe. And that should be the number one goal of this committee. That should be the number one goal of all members in Congress. So thank you for what you do. I had an opportunity to go to the border in 2019 as a part of the conferee on the Appropriations Committee. And, we had a great host, Henry Cuellar. We went to Laredo, and Ranking Member Fleischman was with us, and Chairman Granger at the time. And, while we were at a point of entry, they seized 7 to 8 kilos of cocaine. And I know why some of my colleagues are focused on, all this humanitarian crisis at the border, and we're focused on it as well. But I'm wondering about the crisis and the dangers of, as our CBP agents and others are misdirected, taking off their core missions to focus on, other jobs, other things to help address the humanitarian crisis. We have huge gaping holes on our southern border where we don't know what's coming over. We don't know the true amount of drugs. I mean, obviously, what you seized in 2020, the COVID epidemic obviously did not keep the cartels from working overtime. 44,000 pounds of cocaine, 5,700 pounds of heroin, 177,000 pounds of methamphetamine, and 4,700 pounds of fentanyl. Now, if I'm correct, in the back of my napkin figures, 4,700 pounds is enough to kill every American 2 times over. And that's what you seize. And so what scares me is what we haven't seized. So can you kind of address, the type of people that you're apprehending, whether they're on the terrorist watch list, whether they're sex offenders, murderers. And again, those are the ones that we're catching, not the gotaways. And also your concerns with the hard narcotics that are coming across. And what technologies can we give you? I mean, obviously, Congress isn't committed to giving you all the barrier that you need, and we know it's effective. I mean, just look, we wrapped our capital around it with two rows of barrier. So between the boots, the barrier, and technology, what can be most effective in you doing and executing your job and keeping Americans safe?
Sir, thank you. And thank you for acknowledging as well the incredible work the men and women are doing, because ultimately that's what they're hired to do. That's what they want to do. And that's what they are doing. Border security, national security, keeping the American people safe. So just a little bit on the numbers. As we sit here today, our fentanyl seizures are up 308% in fiscal year 21. Heroin 14%, cocaine 100%, and methamphetamines up 20%. So the men and women continue to do a phenomenal job of keeping these dangerous narcotics off the streets. So a couple things on the technology. We have a pretty good plan going into 2024 to increase the vehicles being screened on the southwest border from less than 1% to around 40% in fiscal year 2024. Thank you to Congress for those funds. We also have a plan to increase our screening technology for the commercial traffic on the southwest border up to 90% by fiscal year 2024, and we're in the process of procuring that equipment as well. If you look at the fentanyl pandemic and where it started at the mail facilities, and thanks to this committee, we received funds and have deployed some additional technology at our mail facilities in JFK, where my daytime job is, where I left on January 20th. And that technology and the imaging of the mail facilities and the ECCs is going to be hugely beneficial. On the Border Patrol side, we continue to look at technologies such as AST, which have artificial intelligence embedded within it. And that should help to ensure that we're directing agents to the places they need to be to encounter the subjects we need to encounter.
All right. Well, thank you, Commissioner Miller. I see my time's expired. I look forward to having a second round of questions. Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Price.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome, Commissioner. We appreciate your testimony and your service, and that of your colleagues as well. I have some questions about the attempts to alter the so-called Remain in Mexico policy, which I'm sure other members will also be addressing. I want to start, though, with an aspect, a wrinkle in that policy that I encountered at the border. Like lots of members, I visited the border and have a lasting impression from those visits. And this one has to do with Matamoros and the practice of so-called metering. As you know, under the Trump administration, the CBP engaged in the practice of metering or regulating asylum seekers at our nation's ports of entry, severely limiting the number of people who were able to even seek asylum. I remember going in the summer of 2019 to Matamoros. There were migrants, mainly it appeared families, waiting outside the bridge, not even able to go on the bridge. 102-degree heat, very insecure conditions, very deprived conditions. Some had waited months, 3 or 4 months, for their names to be called from a kind of vague, indeterminate list for the few slots that were available to even make application for asylum. And of course, they knew that if their name did come up and they could make application, then they would need to spend time in overcrowded CBP holding facilities or indeed be sent back into Mexico. Now, there was no CBP waiting list or official process that allowed migrants to wait in line. It was run by someone different at every Mexican border town. No transparency in how names appeared on the list, in what order. No transparency in terms of how the names came up, whether there might be people jumping the line. The list was taped to the window of a building in Matamoros. It had 2,000 names on it. And the migrants told me that at the time, no name had been called for not one name. Now, this process created a huge backlog of asylum seekers who were denied even the chance to make application at our ports. They, of course, sometimes concluded they had no choice but to attempt to cross the borders between our ports. So what can you tell me about that metering policy and how, whether you have officially ended the practice or what's going on with this particular class of asylum seekers? Given the history of metering and other troubling Trump policies, what have you done in this administration to improve the process for handling these applicants, this large backlog of applicants?
Sir, thank you for your question. As you know, at our nation's ports of entry, in particular on the southwest border, we have a difficult task of juggling legitimate trade and travel while doing things like intercepting fentanyl that's coming into our communities, whether it's a hard narcotics or the bad people, bad things. And really that, that's our major job, facilitating legitimate trade and travel. And on top of that, when you layer in the situation we're currently seeing with the global pandemic, our facilities, as you know, were not built to hold migrants or anybody for long amounts of time. So I think to answer your question, we have started through the MPP process or wind down and bringing those folks back into the country for their hearings. We have started a process where we're getting advanced information and scheduling and doing the vetting in advance and scheduling times for them to arrive at our ports of entry, and thus enabling us to process them in a very timely manner. So I think as we move forward, when we talk about technology and innovation and some of those things, I think those are the processes that we need to look at. So we're getting the advanced information, we're able to do the vetting in advance, and we're able to ensure that we're processing appropriately when they arrive at our nation's ports of entry. So at the same time, we can do our job of facilitating legitimate trade and travel.
So are these encampments still there, or how has the situation changed for the asylum seeker who previously was waiting in this kind of indeterminate situation?
So for the folks that are remaining in Mexico, we are scheduling appointments. Matamoros, excuse me. We have wound down that camp through the MPP process, but we still do in places like San Ysidro have large groups of folks south of our border.
But they do know when they can have an appointment, or is that not right? Are they still waiting for days and waiting for some kind of list to be cleared? That's my question.
Yeah, I'll have to get back to you on that question, but not at this time.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Henson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. I want to go back to kind of a line of questioning that we first started learning about at our hearing last week. we exposed some concerning issues on the communication challenges between CBP and ICE. So Acting Commissioner Miller, I'm going to focus on that today. I appreciate your service to our country. I think it's imperative that we acknowledge and our gratitude for the men and women who are keeping our borders safe. And again, I want to make sure we're prioritizing their morale. We're hearing about a lot of very challenging situations at the border that they are obviously on the front lines of. Back in April, I had the chance to visit the southern border myself and see the current crisis. And your agents welcomed me there. They welcomed our delegation. We heard about all the time and energy they're devoting to their jobs to keep the country safe. And I'm grateful to them. They're putting their lives in harm's way, obviously, to catch those not only crossing into our country illegally, but they're also policing the human smugglers, the drug traffickers, the cartels. I think it's got to be frustrating for them to then see those people sometimes released into the interior soon after. Several reports have come to my attention regarding notices to appear. Obviously, those are the official notices issued to illegal immigrants, telling them that they're expected to report to a court proceeding or an immigration office. And I'd like to follow up a little bit on the chairwoman's line of questioning. I appreciated her remarks about some of the discrepancies with the notices to appear. So my first question today is CBP currently providing one of these notices to appear to all individuals, families, unaccompanied minors who are released from CBP into the interior? And if not, can you give me a specific ratio?
So we are, yes, issuing, depending the processing pathway, obviously, unaccompanied children are processed a different way under Title VIII and turned over to HHS. And single adults, if they're returned, again, will be processed under Title VIII. If we're talking about the family units, whether it's a notice to appear or notice to report, yes, we are issuing one or the other for all family units.
Is there specific written guidance for how you issue those NTAs, who gets one, who does not?
There is.
Okay.
We have policies and procedures across the Southwest border, across the CBP.
If you could make sure our office gets those, that would be much appreciated. And then is it possible at this point for CBP and ICE or either agency independently to track an individual who does not receive an NTA?
I don't understand the question. We are giving them an NTA or an NTR. The folks that would not get one were not processing, and we would not have been counted.
So if they're released without an NTA, there's no way to track them. Once you give them an NTA, is there a way to track them through either CBP when you release them or ICE at this point? Do you know?
So we don't release them without an NTA or an NTR. However, if we do release them with an NTA or NTR, we do collect the 213 or the information. We do collect the I-385 information. And we do collect the destination information if they give it to us. And yes, we can pull that out as well as HS.
So you can collect the information, but can you actually track them? Can you find out if, what's the process for actually ensuring that after they get that NTA or NTR, they actually get to the place they said they were going to be? Do you have the ability to do that?
We can pull the information from the forms or the information that we've have in our systems, and we can tell if they've reported within the 60 days as they're supposed to.
Okay, so the biggest concern I have is the breakdown in communication between CBP and ICE, because as we learned last week, and they did tell us that there is no way to track them once the NTA or NTR is given and they're out of your custody until they either check in or, as we know, many times don't. So I'd like to know what efforts you're taking as an organization to coordinate with ICE on tracking those people, making sure that your processes are more coordinated, because right now, frankly, it seems like one arm doesn't know what the other arm's doing.
Thank you for that question, and I will say that our relationship with ICE today is 100% better, and it continues to get better. We talk every single day. We stood up a movement coordination cell right here in the Ronald Reagan building where I sit. ICE is present in the movement coordination cell, and as we continue to look at single adults and family units, they're going to put additional people in that movement coordination cell, which will allow us to ensure that we're seeing the same thing at the same time.
Okay, well, I look forward to a second round of questioning, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for holding today's hearing. Mr. Miller, we know that vaccination remains a critical part of ending the COVID-19 pandemic and saving lives. So I'm interested to hear about the vaccine rollout for both your workforce and the people in your custody. Let's start with your workforce. Mr. Miller, what percentage of CBP employees are fully vaccinated as of today or your most recent available data?
So excuse me, ma'am, thank you for your question.
Sure.
I do not know the percentage of individuals in our workforce that have the vaccination. Obviously, there's privacy laws, and they can get the vaccination on their own, or they can get the vaccination through the VA. I can tell you that we had a slow rollout of our vaccination to the workforce, but under the guise of our chief medical officer and the department, we made significant progress, and obviously now the vaccine's available to all those who want it.
Well, I did read in your testimony that 33% of your eligible workforce were vaccinated at VA sites, and the rest do have access to community sites. Do you know how many have actually taken advantage of that access and been vaccinated with your VA partnership?
The VA, so those numbers are correct with the VA partnership. I do not know outside the VA partnership.
I see. Okay, so I understand that CBP previously faced some vaccine supply challenges that slowed down workforce vaccination efforts. Now that vaccine production has caught up with demand, are you finding it easier to get more shots in arms, or has vaccine confidence, issues created challenges on the demand side?
So, certainly on the demand side, I think everybody that wants a vaccine can get the vaccine, and we're continuing to message to the workforce the benefits of the vaccine, and encouraging them to get the vaccine while not mandating it.
Yeah, this is a top concern for me, and it needs to be a proactive priority for the department as well. Vaccine hesitancy in America is at an all-time high, and the stakes are literally life or death. I was devastated when I heard about Freddie Vasquez, the Border Patrol agent and father of 4 who lost his life to COVID earlier this month. His wife, a nurse, reports that he took every precaution to protect his family over the past year, but ultimately he had delayed getting vaccinated. What steps are you taking to proactively combat vaccine hesitancy and disinformation, and to make sure your employees have accurate information about the safety, efficacy, and critical importance of the COVID-19 vaccines?
So I myself, all the leadership in CBP, we continue to message it, we continue to muster it, we continue to message it at the local levels, the national levels, the sector levels, the station levels, the port levels. But ultimately, it's a personal choice. So we're going to continue to message it in any way we can, and I'm willing to work with you if you think you have some good ideas for us to how to continue to message the benefits of the vaccination for the workforce, because I too believe that's vitally important. And frankly, stories like that break my heart.
Great, thank you, sir. Vaccinating CBP employees is essential to not only protecting their own health, but also ensuring that they don't expose migrants to the virus or bring it home from their workplace to their families and communities. Now that we've got enough vaccines to go around, there's no excuse for vaccination rates to be across the country to be so low as they are, and especially for our own federal workforce. I know, as you said, you don't want to lose more agents like Freddie Vasquez any more than I do. And so I do look forward to partnering with you and keeping informed about your plans to proactively address this crisis. Thank you. Next, can you tell me about your plans for vaccinating migrants in CBP custody? I understand that DHS is reevaluating its vaccination strategy and that ICE will soon get a direct allocation. What changes can we expect to see at CBP?
So, ma'am, I can tell you, as you pointed out, our first goal really was getting our own folks vaccinated, and it continues to be our #1 priority. Then our second goal was really to fix the overcrowding in our facilities, working with HHS, ICE, FEMA, and the like, to ensure that we're getting children the proper care that they needed. And right now, as we sit, the children, time in custody is about 20 hours, 21 hours, but it's under a day. And I have, as you know, continual conversations with the chief medical officer at the department. He has indicated that he is working with ICE, but we have not had those conversations with CBP as of yet.
Okay. Well, as you know, vaccinating migrants not only keeps them safe, but it also protects the communities that they may travel to after they leave your custody. The question that we face must be not how. It must be how, not if, we get vaccines to migrants. And so I really ask that you begin to make those plans and keep our committee updated on any resource needs that you have as you do the vaccine rollout. Now, Mr. Miller, as you know, the chairwoman and I pushed to include funding in the fiscal 20 appropriations for an interoperable electronic health record system, or EHR, for Customs and Border Protection. And as a nurse, I've seen firsthand how important good record keeping is to good patient care. Obviously, continuity of care can be an even greater challenge for migrants who may be transferred from one federal agency to another. And I witnessed this myself when I visited the border in 2019 and saw records being kept on paper if they were kept at all, which is why I'm so glad that the funds we provided are already being put to use. I understand that you've nearly completed phase 1 of the EHR rollout. And so very quickly before my time is expired, we know phase 1 has began along the southwest border. Have your officers begun using the new system to ensure that migrants are getting appropriate care, and has the rollout gone smoothly?
Yes, we have, and as stated, we'll complete this summer. We'll complete rollout of phase 1 across the southwest border, and quickly phase 2 will be connecting to our other systems, both the OFO and the Office of Border Patrol. And thirdly, we'll start working with the other government agencies.
Excellent. My time's expired. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Miller, thank you very much for your service, and please pass on to your men and women our condolences for those 34 officers who lost their lives this last year. I want to join with the chairwoman in offering those condolences, and also to the Freddie Vasquez's family as well, who's sadly having a funeral today. We greatly appreciate and honor their service to this country. But as you know, we do have a lot of crisis that we're facing in this country right now, not just on the southern border. I mean, we're looking at economic crisis. Lumber is skyrocketing prices. Food costs are going up. We've got an energy crisis. We've got gas lines that I haven't seen since the 1970s. And we've got a national security issue with Israel and Hamas, and they've been emboldened by the perceived weakness of this administration, and now they finally admit that we have a crisis at the border that, quite frankly, Mr. Miller or Commissioner Miller, you're going to have to deal with. And so I want to make sure that this committee is doing all we can to help you be successful. And I think some of what we need to do is talk plainly about some of these programs. The notice to appear is not a notice to appear, it's a notice to disappear into the interior of this country. And I'll let you share the numbers that actually show up when they're supposed to. And that's in addition to all of the other alternatives to detention that are utilized. So if you could talk a little bit about the NTA, and I'd like an answer to this as well, Commissioner, because I'm very concerned, and I think it's important that this committee know the 287G program, and I'm not talking about the program on the street, the task force effort. I'm talking about the GYM, the jail piece of 287G, where we take criminals who have already been arrested and help ICE get them out of the country. I'm hearing that the 287G program may be eliminated by the Biden-Harris administration. I hope that's not true, because I can tell you, having been a sheriff and run a 287G program, my community was much safer because I was able to get all of those criminal aliens out of the country. And so if you could talk a little bit about that as well, I'd be curious to know where you see us going on 287G and the notice to disappear into the interior of the country program.
Well, sir, thank you for your question. And really, I would defer both of those questions to ICE.
Have you heard that discussion about doing away with 287G?
I have not.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this, because this is an area I know that we can help you. As the points of entry, and you talked about the increase of folks coming between those points of entry, crossing the border, tunnels are a major factor. And sometimes I don't think we give them enough emphasis. And I really, and not faulting you, but I really do believe that the tunneling program has been insufficient at best. And what can we do to help you get a better tunneling detection program started?
Well, sir, thank you for that question. I think we have made progress in the tunnel detection program. In the last couple of years, we've stood up regional teams in San Diego, California, Nogales, Arizona, El Paso, Texas, and McAllen, along with the tunnel task force that HSI runs. We have made additional, thanks to this committee's help, we've made additional investments in persistent and mobile detection technologies. I just received a brief yesterday about the interagency collaboration that's going on. And I see that our time has expired, but that is going on in this to address this problem area, and we'll continue to work with you and your staff to ensure that we're getting the right technology to improve the program.
Okay, and we may be able to talk about that a little more on a follow-up second round. Madam Chair, I see my time has expired. I yield back.
Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Welcome, sir. Good to talk to you the other day. As I mentioned, I'd like to go into a little more detail. On August 28th, 2020, 20 dogs entered the U.S. on a flight from Jordan to Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. Due to improper vaccination certificates, 18 of these dogs were denied entry and were held by Alliance Ground International, LLC, a Customs and Border Patrol bonded warehouse, where they awaited CDC and APHIS review. These animals were later found in small cages covered in feces and urine and had been without food or water for several days. Several of the dogs died, a clear and brazen violation of the Animal Welfare Act. During the pandemic, live animal imports as pets increased significantly, and there is concern this incident will repeat itself since CBD lacks adequate facilities and procedures to care for live animals at all the ports of entry. At this time, there's only one such facility, known as ARC, that is equipped to safely handle live animals during potential required quarantines. It is located in New York City, which obviously doesn't help everywhere else in the country. Why is there only one CBP bonded warehouse facility in the U.S. that is well equipped to care for live animals that are held for legally required quarantines? And can you commit to adding more facilities that will meet the standard for care for live animals at ports of entry? What resources do you need to do this?
Sir, thank you for the question. And, number one, we did work with our interagency partners in Chicago to address that issue, sent out what's called a trade pipeline to ensure something like that doesn't happen again. There's multiple agencies involved, whether it's a Center for Disease Control or whether it's USD, APHIS, As you mentioned, we do have a bonded warehouse in New York to cover such issues. So, I'm committed to working with you and the interagency to figure out what we can do to continue to look at this issue and ensure that we have the proper carrying and facilities at our other locations.
It's not that there aren't private sector facilities that can't do this. We need to locate them, certify them, and pay them for their services. Can we commit to doing this especially at the major ports of entry in the United States to start?
Again, I have to talk to APHIS and CDC, and we'll look at that and certainly get back to you.
Right, and there are currently no CPB practices in place to require every bonded warehouse to maintain the standard of care for live animals that exceeds the basic requirements of the Animal Welfare Act. And as we saw in this incident in Chicago, it was a major fail. Will you commit to updating the practices to ensure the safety and welfare of live animals in custody and the bonded warehouses that contract with you?
Yeah, again, yes, we'll work on that with our partners.
All right, well, we appreciate that. Rather than go into a series that will take much longer, Madam Chairwoman, I will yield back at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. Sorry for my tardiness. Multiple committee hearings, as all of you know. Thank you so much. And I wanted to ask a little bit, Acting Commissioner, about your conversation you had with the ranking member. Looking forward to a world after Title 42, you mentioned coordination with ORR with respect to unaccompanied children. Does CBP plan to coordinate with local NGOs and organizations that support asylum seekers as part of the post-Title 42 strategy as well?
Yes, sir, we do, and we are coordinating. We actually have NGO coordinators across the southwest border, both in the Office of Border Patrol and the Office of Field Operations, who are having almost daily conversations with the NGO. I myself have met with a good portion of the NGOs across the southwest border.
How many of those coordinators do you have? And with respect to their conversations, are you talking, is there a conversation about post Title 42 in that, or is it just we're all gonna work together and keep the lines of communication open? I'm asking specifically about post Title 42.
So there's a coordinator at each sector and at each field office, and we're talking specifically about the coordination that's going on between the NGOs and CBP, which is happening today. Are we talking specifically about post 42, the post 42 environment? I'd have to get back to you on that.
I'd appreciate if you would. Also wanted to continue on the line of questioning that Representative Underwood asked about vaccinations and spend a little time focusing on how CBP's posture may change as they interact with more vaccinated individuals. Does CBP have a process to interact with individuals who state that they have received the vaccine when they present themselves at the border? And does CBP have a plan to validate if an individual has received a vaccine?
So as of now, we do have what's called our job hazard analysis. That's something that we send out to our ports and our border patrol stations that dictates how we interact with the traveling public, the migrants, and those folks we interact with on a daily basis. We continually update the job hazard analysis based on the conditions that we face. As of now, we're treating everybody we encounter as if they may have COVID, but as things change, we'll continue to update that guidance.
What type of strategies are your medical professionals talking about with respect to vaccinated individuals? An individual who presents themselves
and states that they have been vaccinated. What guidance have they been giving you with respect to that? I understand that there's manuals, and I understand that policies get updated. I'm asking specifically about this issue.
Well, specifically today, we're treating everybody as if they would still have COVID. We're still wearing our PPAE. That's most recent job hazard analysis we put out there. CDC is the folks that dictate, the vaccination or testing regimen and how they enter the country. But that's how we're treating them today, as if they would have COVID.
As you think through what that planning might look like, what resources or supplies would you need in order to ensure the safety of CBP personnel, migrants, asylum seekers, and the American public should the border reopen?
So, sir, we continue to ensure that we have the appropriate stockpile of PPAE. To ensure that we have the appropriate supplies for the migrants, for our officers and our agents. We continue to update the guidance as the pandemic changes. I think we've come an awful long ways during the pandemic, learning what and how we can do it, what supplies we need, ensuring that we have the appropriate stockpile. I'd give the agency credit, and we're one of the few agencies that had the appropriate stockpile going into the pandemic to deal with what we're dealing with today.
And I want to give the agency credit for doing that. I just think that there's more that we can do when it comes to providing that discussion and the policies and looking past the next curve. I think we need to do a little bit more of a deep dive and look forward to the continued conversations. Yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir.
I believe that that concludes the first round, so we're going to go into a second round of questioning. Mr. Miller, last week you released data showing more than 178,000 total encounters at the border in April. Can you talk more about the demographics that make up that number, the trends you're seeing with regards to migrants coming from countries other than Mexico or the Northern Triangle countries? And talk about some of the push and pull factors for migrants in different demographics and for different originating countries.
Thank you, ma'am, for that question. So really right now across the southwest border, we're seeing about 65% single adults, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10% of unaccompanied children, and about 25% family units across the southwest border. As I indicated in our first question, the family unit percentage is a little bit higher in the Rio Grande Valley. When we look at the demographics, we continue to see Mexico and the Northern Triangle being the highest four. Ecuador, Cuba, Brazil, Venezuela, Haiti, Nicaragua, round out the top 10 of the folks we're seeing. What we've seen on the western flank is we've seen an increase of the Brazilians, which provide a unique challenge because of the Portuguese language and ensuring that we have the folks that communicate with them the right way. We continue to see a high amount of Cubans, I think I mentioned, and Venezuelans as well.
Okay, and some of the push and pull factors that you're seeing for these different demographics?
So I think the push and pull factors are pretty much the same across the demographics. As we've seen the increase, focus on Brazil a little bit. Brazil has had a real tough time with the pandemic, the economic insecurity. The Northern Triangle, as you know, we've had droughts, we've had hurricanes, the employment, the crime, the corruption. So, I think some of the factors that we've seen over time remain the same.
Okay. And I want to ask a question. This has to do with encounters in March, which totaled over 173,000, of which around 60,000 or 35% were so-called recidivists, meaning individuals who attempted to re-enter the country after having been previously removed. Do you think that a relatively high recidivism rate is linked to the current reliance on Title 42 expulsion authority?
I do. I think Title 42 lends itself to a higher recidivism rate. However, that being said, we're able to process these folks and send them back relatively quickly, keeping them out of our facilities and keeping the facilities decompressed.
Okay. I recently traveled with the secretary to visit the temporary CBP facility in Donna, Texas. And while I noted a much improved environment as compared to the surge in 2019, more improvements are still needed for how CBP cares for those in its custody, particularly care for children and families. I understand that you're working closely with the DHS Chief Medical Officer to address short, medium, and long-term issues to improve the care of children. What recommendations is the CMO making at this time?
Thank you, ma'am. Just as a little background for everybody here, in 2016, we had no medical staff at our facilities. At the beginning of the current situation, we had around 700 medical staff. Now today, as we sit here, we have 850 across the southwest border. We have hired additional caregivers. That is one of the short-term recommendations that the CMO made that we're acting on, additional caregivers. We have 4 behavioral health advisors that can be contacted by the caregivers on the ground. Some of the other recommendations that have been made of ensuring that the children are orientated, more orientation videos, ensuring that they have frequent contact, ability to contact the relatives via phones. We're implementing those. Keeping the kids active, things like coloring books, getting outside, ensuring that we're getting them outside 2 or 3 times a day.
Mr. Miller, I'm running short of time, so I have a follow-up that I think is important, and that is what the status is of establishing a child welfare professional program, and increasing the number of non-medical child caregivers, because that's been a top priority of mine and of this subcommittee. Can you give us a status report on that?
Yeah, so ma'am, we are in the process of hiring additional caregivers. We have 260 in the pipeline or hired now, and we're getting those folks on the ground across the southwest border.
Okay, and what is the status of their training?
So the training
of CBP personnel who come into contact with migrants who have trauma. What is their ongoing training of CBP officers with regards to working with these children that have trauma?
So thank you for that question, and we are working with the CMO, and we will be training our Border Patrol agents along with the caregivers in trauma-informed training care.
Thank you. Mr. Fleischman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Miller, continuing with my line of questioning about Title 42, sir, do you think people are waiting in Mexico in anticipation of the Title 42 declaration being lifted soon?
I don't know that they're waiting in Mexico for the Title 42 to be lifted. I do know that we are preparing in the Customs and Border Protection for the eventuality of Title 42 to be lifted. And we discussed many of those things that we're doing to prepare for it.
I see in your written testimony, sir, that about 62% of total encounters resulted in a Title 42 expulsion for the month of April. For the 38% of persons encountered, for the other 38% of the persons encountered, what was the ultimate result of their encounters with CBP? And what was it about this population that made them not eligible for Title 42 expulsion, sir?
So Title 42 is mainly, easiest way to say it is for Spanish-speaking nations. So some of the folks you're talking about would have been from other locations. Many of them would have been those family units with tender age children that we talked about. So those would be the two biggest groups.
Thank you. Should or when Title 42 gets lifted, what percentage of that 62% will still be able to be quickly repatriated?
So I think, as we discussed before, a large percentage of who we're seeing right now, about 65% of the folks we're seeing are single adults, and we will continue to work with ICE on Title 8 processing on those individuals.
Thank you for that. Following up on that, are you getting the support you need from ICE and HHS to quickly remove migrants from the Border Patrol stations and land ports of entry, sir?
So we've made significant progress with unaccompanied children, as we've mentioned, through the movement coordination cell that we stood up here at the Ronald Reagan building at CBP headquarters. We're literally sitting side by side, looking at the information every single day to ensure that we're moving the children out within that mandated 72 hours, and really trying to do it within a day. We're taking the same approach with the single adults and the family units, and that we're going to stand up a cell, interagency cell with ICE and CBP to continue to look at the surges across the southwest border, sector by sector, field office by field office, so we can respond timely to those situations.
Yes, sir. And finally, will COVID still be an operational challenge at the border even when public health declaration is lifted? If so, how will you need to adapt to keep your people safe?
Well, thank you for that question, sir, because the health and welfare of the workforce continues to be the #1 priority here. So we're going to need to work very closely with the healthcare professionals, with CDC, with everybody to ensure, to the previous line of questioning from Congressman Aguilar on exactly what we're going to do to plan out for the eventuality of the Title 42 and Title 19 go away. So those are ongoing discussions with the medical professionals. Will be happy to update you as they come to conclusion.
Mr. Miller, thank you for answering my questions and for your service and stepping up at this time. Madam Chair, I have some more time left, but in light of the fact that some of the members want to ask additional questions, I'm going to yield back at this time. So thank you so much and appreciate your testimony.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Miller, again, we have already reached out to your office and sit down with you and CDC and your health, DHS health officer to talk about the border restrictions. As I mentioned, just to add one last point, I go home every day. So every week. So I live at the border. I don't go visit. So I see things very differently from some of my colleagues, both the Democrats and the Republicans. And every time I fly over here in the mornings, I ask the Border Patrol folks there, how many families are there, how many people are there flying. There are families that fly every time I fly to DC on the plane. And again, it's not a health issue to have those folks, but the legal visa holders from Mexico, that's a health issue. So I do want to follow up on that because I see that every time I go home to the border. I want to ask about the construction of the border wall. As you know, that's set against a wall, and I'm glad that they were sending the money. But one of the things is you all made a determination that my area, the Laredo sector, needed a border wall. We don't want a border wall. What we want is everything but the border wall. So there was $1.3 billion that was appropriated to the Laredo sector to build a wall. We don't want the wall. We want the roads. We want to eradicate the carrizos. We want the technology. We want a new checkpoint for Border Patrol outside of Laredo. If that checkpoint was a port of entry, it would be the 4th largest port of entry in the whole country because of the number of trucks that we have there. The World Trade Bridge is now at 17,000 trucks a day. And most drugs will come through ports of entry and not in between. My question, and I know I had asked the chairwoman about this at the very beginning, is will that $1.3 billion that got appropriated to the Laredo sector stay there for technology, roads, and all that? Or is this now a pot of money that Homeland is going to take out and put in other places of the area? The security questions are still there. I mean, y'all thought that there was a need for a wall, which I disagree, but I still want the technology there. Will y'all are y'all looking at putting that money back in the Laredo sector, or are you going to take that somewhere else and say there's no need, there's no security issue in my sector?
Well, sir, as I mentioned before, the final determination on the wall and the funding, is with DHS and the administration as we speak. Certainly acknowledge, as we've discussed previously, sir, the need for technology infrastructure and people to secure the southwest border. And we're going to continue to look at what that calculus needs to be and ensure that we're getting the technology downrange to help the men and women of CBP and keep our community safe.
Well, I'd like to follow up on that because I'm going to push for that money to stay there. One of the things I see is, the Del Rio sector has Brazilians, has people from Cuba, Haitians, Venezuelans. The Valley gets some of the family units, as you mentioned, the percentages, family and unaccompanied kids. Laredo gets over 90% of the apprehensions are Mexicans, and we have stash houses. We got, times where they put up 180 people in a trailer. SIP gangs, as you know, SIP gangs usually steal drugs from one another, but I have videos where they are stealing a commodity, if I can use that term, which are people. They're stealing undocumented aliens from one gang to the other gang, and anybody wants to see that video, I'll be happy to share it with you. So we got that type of issue, and that's why I'm saying, if you all determine to put a wall, then I will ask you to also determine that we still have that security interest and keep that $1.3 billion in the Laredo area without a wall. So I would ask you to please take a look at that.
Thank you, sir. And, I just like to hit on one of the points that you raised. And we can talk about it with further questioning or offline, but Operation Sentinel and what we're doing to take down these transnational criminal organizations that really are profiting off the vulnerable. So I'd be happy to further discuss those operations and what we're doing to attack these TCOs.
Yes, and we'll follow up with the monies, because most of the monies for smuggling people in come from the U.S. and not from other places. So I think you and I have had a conversation. I'd love to follow up on that. We got to follow that money. With that, thank you so much, Mr. Miller. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Palazzo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Miller, back in, I guess, 2012, 2013, when I was on the Homeland Security Authorization Committee, we would use a term or metrics about operational control over the border. And back then, I think we were around 43% operational control. That means at any given time, we know we have control over the border. And I know that may be outdated. Could you just comment on how, what analysis do y'all use now to kind of derive an operational control number for the board?
Sir, that's something I'll have to get back to you on, the exact analysis. I don't want to misspeak on that, sir.
Okay, please do. Also, I know I've been a huge advocate, as some of my colleagues have been, since I've been in Congress, to utilize the National Guard to help support your frontline people down there, the CBP and ICE and others. Can you tell us about the partnership with the National Guard? Maybe share some successes and some of the stories of what they actually do to support you and your men and women?
Well, sir, thank you. I mean, there's no more important partnership on the southwest border right now than the partnership with the National Guard. As you probably know, that the RFA has got approved for next year as well. So a couple of things. The National Guard continues to provide us flight hours for the Border Patrol agents on the ground when our Air Marine office is not able to provide those hours. They're out there every single day really looking, sitting on those surveillance cameras and some of that surveillance equipment to tip off the Border Patrol agents when we have groups illegally entering between the ports of entry. And really, I can't say enough about the continued service that they have, really saving migrants' lives. You know, I literally see a case every single week where identified somebody that's in distress or has saved somebody that's in distress. So yeah, the work that they're doing every single day to not only help us with the security, but the safety and welfare of those that we encounter is incredible.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. As a National Guardsman myself, I'm glad they're being utilized, and I think it's a huge multiplying effort that helps you focus on your jobs, and they can pick up missions, and they also get it's valuable training for them as well.
They sure do.
They probably wouldn't be getting otherwise. And quick pivot. I know we talk a lot about the southern border. It's truly, again, a humanitarian crisis. It's an invasion. I mean, there's all kinds of adjectives we could use to describe it. And we all have our own reasons why we think it's continuing to be a crisis. But can we pivot to the maritime border for a second? I know you mentioned in your testimony 95,000 miles of coastline. That's also that we do, but I'm more specific towards the Gulf of Mexico. I feel like it's a huge blind spot for us because our focus, like whether it's trying to interdict drugs on the high seas, we're either in the Caribbean or the Miami area or South and Central America. What are some of the things that you could use or share with us any issues that you have with the maritime border?
So again, as you pointed out, 95,000 miles is a lot of miles to patrol, but really the maritime border is much like the Southwest border, and it really comes down to partnerships, right? We really need to be able to work with, and we do work with the United States Coast Guard very closely. We also continue to work with multiple interagency groups. We have a center down there at New Orleans where we're working with ICE, we're working with Coast Guard, the state and locals, Air and Marine. It's about information sharing, and it's continuing to look at technology so we can see into places like the Gulf. I think when you look at the shoreline down in Florida, it's a little bit more advanced. Working with Chiat South or JTF East. And the partnerships downrange with our partners, whether it be Panama, Guatemala, Honduras, or Guatemala, Costa Rica, and some of those places. So very challenging, but it is all about partnerships and increasing our technology.
Absolutely. Partnerships and relationships are extremely important. Commissioner Miller, thank you so much. My time's up. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Price?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Commissioner, I appreciate your offer at the last round of questioning to get back with a more detailed account for the record of the metering policy that I described and where that stands at this point. I think it's important to know how individuals and families in those circumstances are now being dealt with, and what remains really in terms of how we should be dealing with this and how we can deal with this in a responsible way, so that people are able to make their application and then pending the review are able to wait in tolerable circumstances. With that, let me turn to the Mexico policy itself, the Remain in Mexico policy itself. As you know, migrants make this treacherous journey, dangerous journey to the U.S. to seek legal refuge. They, having applied, they often have had to wait in overcrowded CBP facilities much longer than the prescribed time, and then under the Trump administration, the policy was in many, if not most of these cases, to return these migrants to Mexico, to dangerous border towns, encampment situations, under a program with little or no oversight. They faced extreme difficulties in Mexico, often just insecure, food insecure, dangerous situations. They had, of course, trouble with getting legal counsel. They often had their cases closed in absentia because they were simply unable to return for their court hearings, or to even learn when those hearings were occurring in any kind of reliable way. So thankfully, the Biden administration has now announced that it is ending this policy. Tens of thousands of people, including vulnerable populations who were forcibly returned to Mexico, are now being processed, or in the stage of beginning to be processed. So that's what I want to ask you to describe. What challenges the agency's encountering and trying to do this course correction, to remedy this program? What additional resources or legislative changes do you need to regain our footing in the handling and processing of these individuals? And what kind of success have you had in processing the so-called MPP migrants since the February change in policy?
Sir, thank you for that question. And really, I'd like to highlight really the incredible work by the Office of Field Operations and their innovation, and the Office of Information Technology, working with the partners in Mexico, the international organizations. We're able to collect advanced information through our CBP One app, and really vet those individuals in advance of arrival and schedule arrival times from Brownsville, Eagle Paso, El Paso, Hidalgo, Laredo, and San Diego, to ensure that we're processing expeditiously, but to ensure that we're also continuing to uphold border security and national security at the same time. So today we've processed over 10,000 of those individuals through our ports of entry. As far as challenges, I know we're looking at some of the additional population, what we call the yellow population, that was removed in absentia. So those folks, we're working with EOIR and OPLA, ICE OPLA, to have those cases open back up, at which time we'll begin doing that same process through the international organizations, gathering the information, guiding them, scheduling the time, and the humane and orderly process.
Well, thank you for that update. And here too, if you want to provide further information for the record, that would let us gauge the scale of this effort, the problems remaining, that would be helpful. We commend you for turning this around, but we know that it's not easy, and these situations are inherently difficult. And so any further information you want to provide, we will be receptive.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Henson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you again, Commissioner Miller, for going through round two and staying to answer our questions today. I just wanted to focus the second round on something that I think people back in Iowa have told me they're concerned about. I'm certainly concerned about human trafficking across the southern border, particularly when minor children are involved. We've got several groups in Iowa, Chains Interrupted in my district being one of them, that are working to end human trafficking. So just want to ask you some questions specifically about that. How does CBP verify the ages of individuals when they're apprehended at the border or when they're brought into custody? Because obviously there can be some discrepancies there. So how is that process working?
It's a difficult process, to be perfectly honest with you. So as we encounter individuals, whether they have documents or what have you, who they're with, if we've previously encountered them, questions to them, questions to their family members. Obviously the Border Patrol agents, Office of Field Operations officers are well trained in this type of activity. We have a couple different things we can, if needed, We can fingerprint children if needed. We work with ICE on the rapid DNA to determine if they're family members. So there's a number of different things we do collectively to try to determine age, if those relationships are legitimate, and we continue to look at new and innovative ways to do that.
So if someone doesn't have an ID, let's say, or they don't have certifiable documentation of their age, what's that step look like? Because obviously, I think the biggest concern is that you have, young girls posing as adult women and vice versa, adult women posing as young girls, or young men and young boys too. So what does that process look like if the information is not something that can be certified?
Well, so, first, and again, that the agents deal with this every single day. So it's, through questioning, it's through talking to the family members, the folks that they're arriving with. But at the end of the day, if we're unable to determine age, we're going to err on the side of being a juvenile and putting them through that process.
Okay. And can you just walk through briefly, what does the process look like for someone, just verification who they are, that they are who they say they are, so to speak?
So again, the agent will encounter them. They'll take them obviously to the station or the sector for processing. They'll ask them their age. They'll see if they have any identifiable information. They'll talk to the folks that they're traveling with, if there are any family unit members, the folks that they were encountered with. Obviously, again, that the agents are talking to hundreds and hundreds of people. So through that experience, they're able to determine determine likely age. But at the end of the day, again, we're going to err on the side of that being a juvenile and coordinate with ICE, HHS, OR&R for the appropriate procedures.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern is we don't want kids getting on planes, going to someplace when we don't know who they're going to. We don't know that they are officially who they say they are. I think the last thing I want, and the last thing my constituents want, is the government to be enabling human trafficking to happen. So if you could follow up with some guidance on the interview processes that your agents use to verify those identities, and especially when it comes to the children, I would certainly appreciate that on follow-up. Also, just wanted to follow up on something Congressman Cuellar was talking about with using technology to help at the border. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the use of like drones and technology, high impact cameras, how those could be helpful to you in keeping agents safe and still fulfilling the goal of keeping our border safe as well? Yeah,
no, thank you for that question. We have what's called an invent team that works with really the investments, venture-backed startup companies, small businesses. So we can look at things like counter UAS, not only UAS, but counter UAS. And we have used those contracts to establish procurement of drones to help us. We continue to look at, towers that have artificial intelligence embedded with them. So there's a number of different things we continue to look at along the southwest border to ensure that we continue to update our technology.
Yeah, I've had a chance to see the autonomous surveillance towers, I think is what you're referring to in person, and there, it's remarkable what we can do with that technology. And so I'd encourage your conversation and continued conversations with us about the use of that technology, because I think that's something that's absolutely crucial moving forward to keep us safe. So Commissioner, thank you so much for answering our questions today. I appreciate you coming before the committee.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Okay. Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Miller, I have some more questions. I want to pick up where we left off with the electronic health record system. So as you look ahead to completing phase 2 of the EHR implementation and integrating that electronic health record with CBP's other systems, do you anticipate any challenges or need for additional resources in order to meet the timeline, which is next year?
I believe on the integration with our own systems, I believe that we should be fine on the timeline. I think where I may have to come back at a future time is when we talk about integration with other government systems. But I think we're in pretty good shape for our own integration.
Thank you. Well, please keep my office updated as you continue rolling out this essential system. Now, Mr. Miller, we both know that a Border Patrol facility is no place for a child. But obviously, when you encounter an unaccompanied child at the border, you can't just leave them to wander the streets or the desert unsupervised. So having kids temporarily in your custody is an unfortunate reality while you prepare to transfer them to a specialized HHS facility and ultimately to their families. I'm relieved that the number of children in CBP custody has decreased from over 5,000 to under 500 in the past 2 months, and that the average time a child spends in custody has decreased from over 5 days to under 24 hours. It's incredible progress, and I know that there's more that we can do to provide for both the physical and the psychosocial health of these children. I was glad to hear that you recently invited the Chief Medical Officer to visit your facilities. Can you tell us more about what he found in his assessment?
First and foremost, and again, I'll take every opportunity to say thank you to the men and women, because the first thing he did tell me was the incredible work that is going on downrange, and the incredible compassion that the Border Patrol agents, mostly in this case, continue to have. And, I think many of us, myself having a 6-year-old, are fathers, mothers, and again, this is a real tough situation for them. So some of the other things I think we mentioned is having that connectivity to the behavioral health advisors, which we have 4 of. So we're continuing to look at that. Continuing to look at those caregivers. We mentioned that. So we're upping the caregivers at the facilities. The training of our officers and agents is essential. So we're going to ensure that we get the proper training. The orientation, he pointed out, was really important because often when the children travel these long distances, they don't quite understand where they are or how they got there, to be perfectly honest. So updating our orientation videos and ensuring they're getting those on a timely basis. Keeping the children active, right? We have to keep the children active. So, ensuring that they're getting outside, which frankly was difficult when we had over 3,000 in the facility in Donna. So getting the children outside at least 2 times a day, looking at those additional activities that we can have the children doing, whether it's coloring, those sorts of things, coloring books, a number of different things depending on the age of the children.
So if you had to have a timeline associated with fulfilling those recommendations, what would that expected timeline be? And what additional resources do you need from our committee to implement the full list of recommendations as quickly as possible?
I don't have an exact timeline. I can say that we're moving out on most, if not all of those issues as we speak here today, but I'd be happy to fill you in on the timeline. Once I really haven't got the formal recommendation yet, but I've asked for it and worked with the team to start implementing some. So once I get the formal recommendations and I have a formal plan, I'll circle back with you and let you know what we're doing.
So does that mean like a month, 2 months?
So it means that we're implementing now, and I would think within the next week or 2 we can get back to you with the plan and what our plans are.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Miller. I know that my constituents share my concern about the well-being of the children who've made this difficult journey to our borders, and I look forward to working with you to ensure that their stays are safe and as short as possible. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Miller, Commissioner Miller, one of the things that I want to make sure is that me and this committee are doing all we can to help you be successful, particularly at our southern border. And I know when Congressman Palazzo asked about the percentage of operational control, I want that same information so that we can help you, but I would actually like to see it served by region, because I know as you travel from San Diego all the way east to the Rio Grande Valley, there's a whole myriad of different types of enforcement taking place. And I think that would give us a good idea, because there's some areas, as Mr. Cuellar said, that they don't want a wall. And you know what? Every area doesn't need a wall. There are areas where surveillance technology, access roads may be all they need. And so what I want to make sure is we're giving you what you need where you need it. And one of the things that I want to focus on also is, I know, for example, in the Fort Huachuca area in Arizona, tremendous work going on there. And I would suspect that's probably one of your highest control areas because we have local, state, and federal working together. They are integrated through the big pipe. You've got the UAS going on there. So all of that, I think, works together. One of the things I want to make sure is as we tighten the southern border, we're going to see more and more people are either going to go over the wall, under the wall, which is why I want to help you with the tunneling, or they're going to go around it. And when they go around it, they're going to go to the maritime corridors. And I have an AMO training center in my district, as you know, in Northeast Florida. And I want to make sure that we've got good throughput there for you to give you the men and women that you need for the air and maritime operations. I know there's some throughput issues at the training center there. And if you can let me know how we can help you with that, we'd really like to step up on that, as well as the tunneling technology that we talked about earlier. So can you let me know where do you think we're going with the AMO in Northeast Florida, and is it going to be able to meet your needs? What do you need?
So I'm going to start by addressing your first request. And yeah, I agree 100% by region. We do track it by region. And, I just want to ensure that we get the Office of Border Patrol up there briefing the folks on, the exact criteria that we use.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your support for Air and Marine and the continued support. I believe that the facility that we build are meeting our training needs, but I'll certainly, if they're not, get back to you and let you know what additional we need. We're making a lot of progress on modernizing our fleet and really standardizing our fleet. So I think we're making progress there as well. On the maritime,
and I should add, Commissioner, they've had some upgrades there, and they've been great. But I do believe there's some additional things that we can do. So I'd appreciate you looking into that.
Oh, no, I certainly will. And on the maritime front, we're already seeing it in San Diego. We're working very closely, with, obviously Border Patrol, Air, Marine, but also with the U.S. Coast Guard, the state and locals to address that threat out there. So that is something we are seeing.
Okay. Well, thank you. And Madam Chair, I see my time is just about out. I will yield back.
Mr. Aguilar.
Thanks so much, Madam Chair. And Acting Commissioner, I wanted to pick up on a topic that the Chair had mentioned. The President's fiscal year 22 discretionary request states that requested funding for DHS will support the safe and humane treatment of migrants in CBP custody. I wanted to raise a proposal that some of my colleagues in the Hispanic Caucus have raised with the President and Vice President to support CBP when there are larger numbers of asylum seekers at our southwest border. This proposal would create a humanitarian response team at the border, staffed by volunteers who have been trained to rapidly respond to the border to assist with supporting asylum seekers and accompanied children at the border. These humanitarian response teams would model existing disaster medical assistance teams, but would also include caseworkers, social workers, child welfare professionals. We believe that these teams will reduce the time that individuals remain in custody and ensure that all migrants are aware of immigration court dates and requirements and help with transportation and logistics as they are reunited with family members working within the HHS and ORR process. Obviously, to create these teams, Do you think this type of structure would be beneficial to assisting CBP in processing individuals at the border?
You know, that's something I'd have to look at. I know we're looking at, obviously, thanks to the Committee for the Funds for Humanitarian Care Center somewhere in South Texas. But the humanitarian response teams isn't something that I've looked at. So I'd love to see the proposal and give you feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love for you to have a conversation with some of our colleagues in the Hispanic Caucus who have been fleshing out some of these ideas as well, to see what technical support or advice or concerns you might have. Commissioner, I'm also concerned about some of the language that was referenced earlier regarding individuals presenting themselves at the border with different names. The vast majority of children seeking asylum at the border are fleeing dangerous and often life-threatening circumstances, and we should be doing all we can to ensure that they receive the appropriate protections and care while as often as we can. Are you aware of widespread examples where migrant children are presenting themselves under different names?
I am not at this point, no.
Are you aware of government trafficking children, as my colleague referenced?
Excuse me, I didn't, it broke up.
Are you aware of the government trafficking children, as was referenced in an earlier question?
We have, back in 2019, we did see quite a few cases with children being trafficked, and that's why we worked with ICE to stand up the rapid DNA testing.
But not by the government.
Oh, not by the government, no.
Right.
No, excuse me. No, I'm sorry.
I just want
to the question.
Of course. I just want to be cautious about the language that we use, because some of those statements have consequences and are often based on little or no evidence. So I just think we need to be thoughtful about how we talk about these incredibly sensitive issues, especially when it includes children. So appreciate you sticking around for a second round, and thank the chair for the indulgence, and yield back.
Thank you, sir.
I don't believe there are any more questions. However, Mr. Miller, in closing, I would like to ask one more question that I believe is on behalf of all the members of this subcommittee. As was noted during the hearing, more than 31 agents, officers, and other personnel have tragically lost their lives in the line of duty since January of last year. In addition to these tragedies, every day CBP personnel interact with migrants who are fleeing desperate circumstances, and the toll on them cannot be discounted. How are you addressing the mental health needs of the CBP workforce as a result of COVID and current operations? And are those services available to the families of CBP personnel?
Well, ma'am, thank you. Thank you for that question. It's the tragedy of the pandemic has obviously affected us all, but it's taken a toll on the workforce, and along with the additional stresses that we see every single day. So as you know, we have a very robust peer support program. We have a very robust chaplaincy program. We have a very robust employee assistance program, or EAP. We have an advocacy program for the survivors. So we are in continual contact with the survivors of those that we lose. But frankly, I'm worried about taking care of those who take care of us. In other words, those groups have had an incredible strain on them over the last year. So one of the things that we're looking at is we're having some clinicians down on the southwest border. We have 3 of them, one in El Paso, one in Del Rio, and one in RGV. I had the chance to visit with the chiefs of the southwest border in San Antonio just last week, and the 3 that have that program said it was very beneficial in that there was somebody on site with them. It wasn't a call, it wasn't an EAP, it was somebody on site with them that they could talk and really think that they have averted some some unfortunate circumstances for our team members. So I think looking at that program, expanding that program to additional sectors and field offices across CBP would be beneficial. But frankly, I'm willing to work with anybody that I can to ensure that the men and women are getting the support they need. So I would welcome any suggestions.
Okay, as a follow-up, in calendar year 2020, the deaths of 6 CBP personnel were attributed to suicide, while there have been 5 such deaths already in 2021. What are you doing specifically to help CBP personnel who may be contemplating suicide, and how can we help you help your workforce?
So, you know, I think supporting the clinicians that we talked about, that, you know, we believe that a tragedy has been averted because of that program. So expanding that program to ensure that there's folks on site to talk to our personnel. We're you know, and the chief of the border patrol, you know, he's the one that brought up taking care of those who take care of us. So we're out there, they're out there talking to our peer support, our chaplains, our advocacy groups every single day. They're spending an awful lot of time in the field. We have what's called Shine a Light campaign going on right now, where myself and the senior leadership are talking to folks about ensuring that they're getting the help they need. Which is good, but you know, I think that one-on-one communication, talking to the folks on the ground, I'm trying to get out as much as I can to talk to the men and women to see what additional support they need. So it's really an all-in approach. But again, you know, I'm welcome to take any additional ideas from the professionals that you know, we do consult with the professionals, but any additional ideas that the committee thinks would help, we're all ears.
Okay, well, please let us know as new information comes up from the professionals that you talk to. Any way that we can be helpful, please let us know. And with that, if there are no more questions, we will conclude today's hearing. Mr. Miller, thank you very much for your time. The Subcommittee on Homeland Security stands adjourned.
Thank you, ma'am.